Would you like me to draw you? The voice was soft, almost apologetic, cutting through the sound of rain pattering against cobblestones. Eleanor looked up from the park bench, where she'd been sitting for the past hour. Tears she thought she'd hidden, mingling with raindrops on her cheeks. A man stood a respectful distance away, holding a worn leather portfolio against his chest like a shield. His eyes, kind eyes, tired eyes, held no pity, only a quiet understanding that made her throat tighten. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice fracturing. "I'm not really. I don't think I'm in any condition to—" "That's exactly why," he said gently, stepping closer, but not invasively so. "The best portraits aren't of people who are composed. They're of people who are real." Eleanor studied him. Mid-30s perhaps, with charcoal-stained fingers and a worn jacket that had seen too many winters. There was something in his face, a weathered gentleness, the look of someone who had learned empathy through his own suffering. She should have said no, should have walked away from this stranger in the rain, returned to her empty penthouse, to the gallery opening she was supposed to attend tonight, to the life that looked perfect from the outside and felt hollow from within. Instead, she nodded. His name was Camden Rivers, and he worked the street corners of downtown with a folding chair and an artist's hope that had somehow survived years of rejection. Eleanor learned this later, much later, after she'd stopped being the elegant widow who ran the Ashford Gallery and started being just Eleanor again, a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. Camden didn't ask questions as he sketched, didn't probe about why a woman in an expensive coat was crying on a park bench in the rain. He simply watched her with an artist's intensity, his pencil moving across paper with a certainty that suggested he was capturing something deeper than features. 20 minutes passed. The rain softened to mist. Eleanor watched him work, watched the concentration in his face, the way he paused occasionally as if listening to something only he could hear. This man was drawing her at her most vulnerable, and somehow that didn't frighten her. Somehow, for the first time since Michael's funeral 3 years ago, she felt less alone. When Camden finally turned the sketchpad toward her, Eleanor's breath caught. It wasn't just a portrait. It was a revelation. He hadn't drawn her sadness as weakness. He'd captured the strength it took to keep breathing through grief. The lines around her eyes weren't just marks of sorrow. They were evidence of survival. Her expression held both devastation and dignity. The face of someone who'd been broken and was learning, slowly, to become whole again in a different shape. "How did you?" Eleanor whispered, unable to finish the question. Camden smiled, a small, sad smile that suggested he understood exactly what she was asking. "I draw what I see, not faces, feelings." "What do I owe you?" "Nothing." He carefully tore the page from his sketchpad, offering it to her. "Some faces deserve to be remembered kindly. Consider it a gift." "I can't just— This is your livelihood, your art." "Art isn't always about money," Camden said quietly. "Sometimes it's just about reminding someone they're still here, still real, still worth seeing." Eleanor took the portrait with trembling hands, staring at this stranger who had somehow reached into her chest and rearranged something fundamental. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to." Camden was already packing up his supplies, preparing to disappear back into the city like some kind of urban guardian angel. "Just be kind to yourself. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." He left before she could ask his name, before she could offer proper payment, before she could do anything except sit in the misting rain with a portrait that felt more honest than any photograph ever taken of her. Eleanor went home that night and didn't attend the gallery opening. Instead, she sat in Michael's study, a room she'd avoided for 3 years, and really looked at Camden's drawing, at the woman she'd become and the woman she might still have the courage to be. The next morning, she returned to the park. Camden was there, sketching an elderly man in a threadbare suit. Eleanor waited, watching from a distance as Camden refused payment from the man, watching as the old man's face transformed when he saw the portrait, as if someone had finally acknowledged his existence. "You came back," Camden said when the elderly man had shuffled away, clutching his portrait like treasure. "I wanted to know your name," Eleanor said, "and I wanted to commission you, properly." Camden's expression shifted, guarded now, wary. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not really a commission artist. I just draw what moves me." "That's exactly why I want to hire you," Eleanor said, but she didn't push. Instead, she came back the next day. And the next. Each time, she watched Camden work, watched him sketch a young mother with her infant, a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, a homeless veteran who hadn't smiled in years, until he saw Camden's rendering of him. Camden never drew for money. He drew for connection, for healing, for the pure, simple act of making someone feel seen. "Why do you do this?" Eleanor asked one afternoon, 3 weeks into their strange, undefined friendship. They were sharing coffee from a food truck, sitting on a bench while autumn leaves skittered across the pavement. Camden was quiet for a long moment, staring into his cup, as if the answer might be floating there. "My mother," he finally said. "She makes crafts, beautiful things, embroidered tablecloths, painted ceramics. She's been trying to sell them at markets for 20 years, barely making enough to survive. But she never stops creating, never stops believing that beauty matters, even when the world doesn't seem to agree." He looked up, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "I wanted to be a real artist once, studied fine arts, applied to every gallery in the city, got rejected from all of them. They said my work was too emotional, not modern enough, not commercial enough. Said I needed to paint what sells, not what feels." "So you paint on sidewalks instead," Eleanor said softly. "I draw where people need it most," Camden corrected. "The art world didn't want what I had to offer. But the people sitting alone in parks, the ones who feel invisible, they do. So I chose them." Eleanor felt something crack open inside her chest. She thought about the Ashford Gallery, about the sterile, intellectual exhibitions she'd been curating since Michael's death. Thought about how she'd lost her own passion for art, somewhere in the machinery of commerce and critical acclaim. "I need to tell you something," she said, her heart hammering. "I'm not just someone who appreciates art. I own the Ashford Gallery." Camden went very still. The Ashford Gallery, the most prestigious contemporary art space in the city. "Yes." "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor pulled out the portrait he'd drawn of her that rainy evening, which she'd been carrying in her bag every day since. "Because this is the most honest piece of art I've encountered in 5 years. Because I've been running a gallery full of technically perfect, emotionally empty work. Because I think you're exactly what the art world needs, even if they don't know it yet." Camden stood abruptly. "I'm not interested in the art world. I told you, they already rejected me." "They rejected what they thought they saw," Eleanor said, standing to face him. "They didn't see you, not really. Just like people walk past you every day on these streets, without understanding what you're offering. But Camden, what if you could reach more people? What if your mother could stop worrying about money? What if the art that heals people could also sustain the artist creating it?" "You don't understand," Camden said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I've been down that road. I've compromised and adjusted and tried to fit into what galleries wanted. It nearly destroyed me. This, what I do here, it's pure, it's real. I can't risk losing that again." Eleanor understood. God, she understood better than he knew. "I'm not asking you to compromise. I'm asking you to trust me." Over the following weeks, Eleanor did something she hadn't done since before Michael died. She took a risk. Not with money or reputation, but with meaning. She began documenting Camden street portraits, with permission from his subjects. Each photograph told 2 stories. The portrait itself, and the face of the person seeing themselves truly recognized for the first time. Camden was resistant at first, uncomfortable with the attention. But Eleanor was patient. She'd learned patience in grief, in the slow, agonizing process of rebuilding a life after loss. She knew you couldn't rush healing, couldn't force transformation. You could only create space for it and wait. "Why are you doing this?" Camden asked one evening as they packed up his supplies. "Really? You could feature any artist in the world. Why me? Eleanor thought about Michael, about the last conversation they'd had before the car accident that took him. He'd told her she was losing herself in the business of art, forgetting why they'd opened the gallery in the first place. To give people something to feel, he'd said, not just something to look at. Because you remind me why art matters, Eleanor said simply, and I need that reminder more than you know. The turning point came on a cold November evening. Eleanor's grandmother, Vivian, the woman who had held Eleanor together through Michael's funeral, through the endless sleepless nights, through the guilt and anger and crushing loneliness, came to visit the gallery. You seem different, Vivian observed, studying Eleanor with those sharp, knowing eyes. More present, more like yourself. Eleanor showed her grandmother the collection of photographs she'd been assembling, Camden's portraits and his subjects' reactions. Vivian went very quiet, moving slowly through each image. This, Vivian finally said, tapping one particular photograph, this is what your gallery was meant to be. Not a showroom, a sanctuary. Grandmother, I can't just... Why not? Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. Eleanor, my dear, you spent 3 years existing, but not living. Running a successful business, but forgetting what success actually means. This artist you found, he's teaching people how to be seen. Who's teaching you? That night, Eleanor made a decision. She began quietly curating a small exhibition in the gallery's intimate side room. Just Camden's work, just portraits of ordinary people, just the raw, honest, emotional truth he captured so effortlessly. When she finally told Camden what she'd done, he was furious. You had no right, he said, his voice tight with betrayal. Those were private moments. Those people trusted me. I got permission from every single person, Eleanor said calmly. And Camden, they wanted to be part of this. They wanted others to experience what they felt when you saw them. This isn't about them. This is about you trying to turn me into something I'm not. No, Eleanor said firmly. This is about me trying to show the world something real, something that matters. And yes, it's also about me trying to repay the kindness you showed a broken woman in the rain who needed someone to see her. Camden stared at her, breathing hard. I don't want to be famous. I don't want critics picking apart my work. I don't want to lose what I have. What if you don't have to lose anything? Eleanor asked softly. What if you can stay exactly who you are and still reach more people? What if your mother could stop making crafts at midnight because she can't afford to pay rent? What if the art that saved you could save others? The exhibition opened on a Friday evening. Eleanor had kept it invitation only, intimate, exactly the opposite of the gallery's usual grand openings. Critics came out of courtesy to her, expecting nothing. What they found left them speechless. Camden's portraits lined the walls, not professionally photographed, but shown as they were created, on sketch paper, with smudged edges and coffee stains, and the beautiful imperfection of art made in real time for real people. Beside each portrait was a photograph of the subject seeing themselves for the first time, their faces transformed by recognition. The room was silent, except for occasional soft sounds, someone clearing their throat, someone else quietly crying. People moved through the space slowly, reverently, as if walking through something sacred. A prominent art critic from the Times stood in front of the portrait of Eleanor in the rain for 15 minutes before finally whispering, I'd forgotten art could do this. By the end of the evening, 3 major galleries had offered Camden exhibitions. 2 museums wanted to discuss acquisitions. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow him. The portraits had gone viral online, not because they were trendy or shocking, but because they were true. Camden looked shell-shocked, standing in the corner, while Eleanor fielded inquiries and offers. When the last guest finally left, he turned to her with wide, disbelieving eyes. What just happened? People saw what I saw, Eleanor said simply. They saw art that actually matters. I don't know how to do this, Camden whispered. I don't know how to be this person they think I am. Eleanor took his hand. The first time she'd touched him, really touched him, in all the months they'd known each other. You don't have to be anyone except who you already are. That's what they're responding to. Your authenticity, your humanity, your refusal to compromise what matters. What if I mess this up? What if success ruins what I do? Then I'll be here to remind you why you started, Eleanor promised, the same way you reminded me why I started. Over the next year, Camden's life transformed in ways he'd never imagined. His work appeared in galleries across the country, then internationally. Art students studied his technique, not for its technical perfection, but for its emotional honesty. His mother retired from her craft business, finally able to rest after decades of struggle. But Camden never stopped drawing on the streets. Every Saturday, without fail, he returned to the park where he'd met Eleanor, offering free portraits to anyone who needed one. The people who sat for him weren't wealthy collectors or influential critics. They were the lonely, the grieving, the invisible. Eleanor came too, watching him work, bringing coffee, occasionally sitting for a portrait herself. Their relationship remained undefined, neither quite friendship nor romance, but something deeper and more essential. Two people who had saved each other without meaning to, who had reminded each other what it meant to feel alive. "Do you ever regret it?" Camden asked one Saturday afternoon, 2 years after that first rainy evening. "Risking your gallery's reputation on someone like me?" Eleanor thought about Michael, about the emptiness she'd carried for so long, about the woman she'd been before Camden drew her back to life. "I regret nothing," she said quietly. "You gave me the greatest gift anyone could give." "What's that?" "You reminded me that art isn't about perfection or prestige or commercial success. It's about connection, about seeing and being seen, about creating moments of recognition that heal something broken inside us." Eleanor smiled, feeling the expression reach her eyes for the first time in years. "You reminded me how to feel, and that saved me." 5 years after their first meeting, Camden's largest retrospective opened at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The centerpiece, hanging in the main hall where thousands would see it daily, was the very first portrait, Eleanor in the rain, strength and sorrow perfectly balanced, a woman learning to survive her grief. Below it, a small plaque read, "The beginning of everything. A stranger's kindness can change 2 lives at once." On opening night, Eleanor and Camden stood before it, surrounded by crowds, but somehow alone in their shared memory. Would you like me to draw you?" Camden asked softly, echoing that first question. Eleanor smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. Not grief this time, but gratitude. "I think you've been drawing me back to life ever since we met." Camden took her hand. "That's because you were never really gone, just hidden, just waiting for someone to see you." They stood together, two people who had found each other in rain and loneliness, and transformed both into something beautiful. Around them, museum visitors moved through Camden's work, their faces reflecting the same wonder Eleanor had felt that first evening, the recognition that art could still matter, could still heal, could still remind us we're not alone. "You know what I realized?" Eleanor said quietly, still staring at that first portrait. "The art world didn't reject you because your work wasn't good enough. They rejected you because your work demanded they feel something real, and that terrified them." "Past tense," Camden noted. "What changed?" "You didn't," Eleanor said. "The world just finally caught up to what I saw that first night. That real artistry isn't about following trends or impressing critics. It's about creating moments of genuine human connection. And you've been doing that all along, on street corners, in parks, anywhere someone needed to be seen." Years later, art historians would cite Camden Rivers as the artist who brought emotional authenticity back to contemporary art. Gallery owners would credit him with shifting the entire industry's values. Students would study his techniques and philosophy. But Camden's greatest legacy wasn't hanging in museums. It was in the thousands of people who'd sat for his portraits, who'd been seen and recognized and reminded of their own humanity. It was in the street artists he mentored, teaching them that commercial success and artistic integrity didn't have to be enemies. It was in Eleanor herself, who had rebuilt her gallery into a space that prioritized meaning over prestige, connection over commerce. On quiet Saturday mornings, you could still find Camden in the park, sketching whoever needed it most. And beside him, occasionally, sat Eleanor. Not the powerful gallery owner, not the wealthy widow, just a woman who had learned to be fully present again, fully alive. "You changed everything that night," Eleanor said on one such morning, watching Camden sketch a young woman who looked as lost as Eleanor had once been. Camden shook his head slightly, never looking away from his subject. "We changed each other. You gave my art purpose beyond survival. I gave you a reason to feel again. That's not one person changing another. That's two people healing together." "Still," Eleanor insisted softly, "you saw me when I was invisible. That matters more than you know." Camden finished the sketch, handed it to the young woman with the same gentle words he'd given Eleanor years ago. "Some faces deserve to be remembered kindly." Then he turned to Eleanor, really looked at her, the way only an artist who has spent years studying emotion can look. "You were never invisible," he said quietly. "You were just waiting in the rain for someone who knew how to see in the dark." The greatest kindness we can offer is truly seeing each other, not the masks we wear or the roles we play, but the hidden emotions we carry. When we take time to recognize someone's humanity, to acknowledge their pain and strength and complexity, we give them the gift of being known. And sometimes, in that moment of recognition, we heal not just them, but ourselves. Because real connection, the kind that sees past surfaces into souls, transforms everyone it touches. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.